Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Annie Saunders and Andrew Schneider, who are going to talk to us about their creative process behind their project Current, a time-based site-specific sound walk through Lower Manhattan. It showed at Tribeca Film Festival and won the 2021 Tribeca Festival Immersive Creative Nonfiction Award and the Tribeca X Award. And I guess showing might not be the right word. It was heard there. I had the pleasure of experiencing Current at the festival back in June, and I was immediately taken by how I felt like I was experiencing theater in the street, even though I was on my phone and with headphones. And in fact, the New York Times review of Current entitled their article, "Theater is in the Streets of New York if you listen." And that was exactly right. The soundwalk takes many elements from theater, but as they will explain, it also takes from sound design, the web, installation. It's an interdisciplinary collaboration with interdisciplinary artists who are creating perhaps a new type of theater or art or soundwalk. And today they will talk about their process that leads to this highly original and groundbreaking work. Annie describes herself as a multidisciplinary creator and director of site-specific experiences. She's made many award-winning installations and performance works for major art institutions, as well as immersive projects in disused buildings and experiential works in public space. You can read more about her in the chat. Andrew is an Obie Award-winning Drama Desk nominated performer, writer, and interactive electronics artist, creating original works for theater, dance, sound, video, and installation since 2003. You can also read more about him in the chat. Before I hand it over to them, I want to remind people to put their questions in the Q&A. They'll talk for about an hour, and then we'll be joined by our panelists for a conversation, and then we will open it to all of you, and we'd love to hear your questions. So without further ado, I hand it to you, Annie and Andrew. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, and hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. It's really an honor to be able to come on and talk about our process. It was really exciting for us just to put together the materials for this talk and look retrospectively at the things that we've made together and this project in particular. So thank you so much for having us. And what we're going to do is sort of reverse engineer the project that Sarah just mentioned, Current. We're going to go through in chronological sections and tell you kind of how the project developed and how it was created and all the different layers in which we put it together. Before we do that, we're just going to kind of thank you, Sarah, for the introduction of just logistically what it was. We just want to show you a little bit of a clip of what it looked like on the location so that you can have in your mind a little bit of what the audience experienced. So as Sarah mentioned, this was a audio experience for audience members on their own phone and their own headphones. It was triggered by location and time of day. And it started here at Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan, which is near the World Trade Center on the corner of Broadway and Cedar. So folks would come to this park. If they were there at the right time and they accessed our platform, they would see a countdown for the audio to begin, and then the audio would begin and they would just be guided. So the audience members had no control of the audio. They couldn't stop, start, pause, etc. And what they heard was spatialized sound that was recorded by Andrew on location in 3 dimensions. So it was just like the city kind of turned up in the headphones. And then they heard narration of Andrew and I.
Speaking of things being turned up in the headphones, there's a lot of tech going on in Zoom land right here. And so if at any point there's sound playing and you can't hear us, just throw it in the chat, because there's a lot of things to monitor around here. So if you can't hear, if it's too loud, if anything like that, just let us know and we'll try to rectify the situation. Okay?
Yeah, and we're just going to work through this presentation in a similar way that we work through our creative process, which as primarily makers of live performances with a lot of contingency and spontaneity and plasticity of form. So we might be making spontaneous decisions and changing stuff in the course of this presentation, and we welcome your participation if you, like Andrew said, if anything is not working.
Yeah.
Just bear with us. It's live. It's happening in real time. Okay, so voices of Andrew and I on this walk guide people down Broadway. They start walking down Broadway. They pass Trinity Church and various other historic monuments, as well as like locations with personal memories to Andrew and I. Andrew used to work in this building on the left many years ago. And at this point in the walk, you're hearing messages that were left by Andrew and I at different times when we were also walking on location. So one of the things that we're going to kind of be sharing with you is like how much editing and layers and conceptual dramaturgy and technical building went into something that basically in its final form sounded like it was recorded in one take. So you're walking down through here going toward the stock exchange, and you're hearing these messages that were left by Andrew and I when we were walking where you're walking now, but at different times from you and different times from each other. And then you're also hearing these spatialized recordings. And at this point, you're sort of leaving the big kind of skyscraper part of Lower Manhattan and going into these more historic parts. As you can see, lots of construction down here, which is something that was thematic in the project.
Lots of temporary things, and just thinking about layers and excavating things and archaeology, which we'll talk about as we go through.
So really the only, just to say that, and we'll get into this in a little bit in the next section, or the next section that we talk about this project, but the only sort of subject that we had for this project at the beginning was the geography of the location. So there was no story, there were no kind of characters or narrative, so to speak. There was just, everything was engendered by the location. So a lot of the research was walking on location and thinking about what the space itself brought up for us, and how that could be kind of extrapolated metaphorically into narrative.
Yeah.
This is how people get eventually to the water.
To the water. And I guess, I mean, before we get to a full explanation of sort of what route people take and how and where they go and where they pause and those sort of revelations, should we go to who we are?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, this is the midpoint of the walk. People end up at the water and then they kind of circle back to where they began. So we'll play you some of the actual narrative and the sound design of Current at the end of the presentation after we go through the build process. But first we wanted to just introduce you a little bit to who we are. So in order to do that, first I'm just going to play this video, which is just a sort of short introduction to my work and practice that's based on an essay that I wrote right after the pandemic started.
Disaster or delight could strike at any moment. Ready? Here we go. Okay, this one goes to the camera. I'm Annie Saunders. I'm a director. This is my creative perspective. I'm going to read some extracts of an essay I wrote in 2020 called "The Medium is the Matter, a Case for Liveness."
The title is intended to draw attention to the fact that a medium is not something neutral. It does something to people.
The thing I keep thinking about is somewhere Marshall McLuhan, who became internationally famous in the 1960s for his catchphrase, "The medium is the message," and his ideas about how the objects that enable mass communication impact our thinking and our behavior, wrote something like, "The only thing you ever say on the telephone is, 'I am speaking to you on the telephone.'" Is anyone else talking on the phone a lot more these days? And for longer stretches of time?
Oh, yes, she's here.
Anyone remember the magical phrase, "It's for you"? McLuhan's big idea was that the mediums of communication themselves, i.e. television, radio, etc., are saying something far beyond the content they carry. That these medium messages have a profound impact on us and on the larger social psyche. That the medium is not a silent, neutral carrier of stories or news or information, but instead has something to say for itself. I mainly make things in the medium of live performance, often where the audience is free to move around. The work puts the physical space and the body of each audience member, what they do, what they feel, where they go, what happens to them, at the forefront of the creative process. I've made work in non-theater spaces and work that uses theater spaces in non-traditional ways. I've also created and directed live experience for brands. When you go to a live performance, you take your body with you. That means that your whole entire sensory apparatus, your consciousness and your attention are all in the same place. And the same is true of the performers. Everyone is only in one place, and they are there essentially for each other. No audience, no show, no show, no audience. Each depends on the other. There is a unique two-way, undivided attention, unlike in the cinema. In the moment before the show begins, an invisible gift is exchanged and silent agreement made between the performer and the audience member. Each says to the other, listen, I'm right here in this room. I am here to do something for you, and everything you do matters and will have an impact on me. It matters that you are here, and it matters that it is now, and it will only happen exactly as it is happening, and it will not happen this way again. I think the medium of live performance reinforces some essential truths that may feel even more acute just now, that time is passing and finite and never coming back, that life is infinitely wild and unpredictable, and that all we can really know is we are right here and right now, and that we have no actual control or any idea of what might happen next. Disaster or delight could strike at any moment. Ready? Is for you.
Okay.
That's really good.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, that's an extract of an essay that I wrote in May of 2020 that actually was in many ways based on a lot of conversations that I was having during the early days of the pandemic, many of which were with Andrew. And Andrew read drafts of that essay and really helped it a lot be created. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an inspiration, even now. Well, I'll talk about it. But like one of my shows, the show that I'm making right now is basically named something that you said in this essay. I don't know if you know that.
I didn't know that. It's nice. Thank you.
We'll talk about it later.
Okay. So has the building been demolished?
Sorry. I think maybe they couldn't hear us for a
Can
second.
you guys hear? Didn't hear that little chat that we just had between
I
us.
think they did.
Okay. Here's a building. This is what it looked like on the left when it was a driveline shop that was vacant. This is what it looked like on the right when it was the home of my show, The Day She'll Declare It. So this is a practice where I take over disused buildings and that are set for demolition or redevelopment and make shows that are kind of live longer as memories and for the audience than they do as architectural structures. This building has now been demolished and is like a huge loft development. So people have moved in and lived through a pandemic in a high rise that is now in that location. So Current has a lot of, there is a lot of site-specific practice in the way that it was created, in the sense of what I said before when we were looking at the 360 about all of the ideas came from the location itself, which is what we mean when we talk about site-specific creation. Like the ideas don't exist before you get to the space. The ideas come from the space, both in terms of what the audience will do and also what the actual story is comes from the location. This is a theater project called Our Country, which is based on recorded interviews between me and my brother. So just to give you a little bit more background of how documentary practice, I suppose, makes its way into my work. This is a show that's based on Antigone, but also draws its main text from interviews between myself and my brother. This actor, Jesse Saylor, plays my brother and also various archetypes in the show. This is a project called Up in Arms that I make with Anna Maria Navier, who's a close friend of mine, also a documentary project and with some live cinema components where we talk about our relationship. We recreated this portrait on the left, and we invite other pairs of friends to do that and have a recorded conversation about it, and then we use that material for various outputs. This is an opera project that you saw a little bit of in the video called The Wreck, which is based on the life of Anne Sexton and also the mythology of the Little Mermaid. So this uses found recordings of Anne Sexton speaking and uses her voice actually as an instrument in the music of the opera. And the idea for this project came from visiting this warehouse in Omaha that felt like a ship to me, which you can't really see in these images, but it had these slanted kind of skylights that just reminded me of being on a boat, which is kind of where this whole idea came from. This is a project called If You Will Forgive Me, which is based on a live television performance of John Cage called Water Walk, where I created a devised theater, kind of hour-long devised theater project based on repetitions of this live TV performance where John Cage went on a celebrity guessing game show, basically, and actually a moment in the collaborative history of Andrew and I was Andrew came and gave some great notes on this rehearsal for this project. And this, you'll see a bunch more images coming up of this piece. This is also a collaboration of Andrew and I, where we made an installation about domestic violence in the Oculus at the World Trade Center. And these are just some images of the, so on the right here, some of the survivors that were involved in the project that I also went around the country and interviewed myself, and the sound design was based on their stories. And that's it. That's me.
That's Annie. So I'm going to talk a little bit about me and what I do and my where I'm coming from. And let's see if this works. Thanks for that. That's so.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm like reminded about why we work together. Truly,
Cool.
truly, yeah.
That's nice.
My name's Andrew Schneider. I do a lot of things around performing arts. And to me, theater is a form of art, and it requires two entities: a maker, an author, and a experiencer. And I think a lot of things can be. I think theater is art. I think art is time-based art, and I think all art is time-based. If you paint a painting, you put it in a gallery. Someone has to flow through that gallery to figure out how to see it. And that wasn't always obvious to me, but that's something I'm thinking about a lot now, is phenomenology and actual experience. Because I have my identity, you have your identity, I can draw a circle around mine, you can draw a circle around yours, but those things, I can't ever know yours, and that's true all the time. But I think as makers, and this is something that, through talking to you a lot, I got a lot clearer about this, is that, you know, if you're made of everything you've ever seen, touched, breathed, loved, and I'm made of the same, I think that our job as makers, if I have my intent and you have your experience, our job as makers, I think, is to draw circles that actually do this, that overlap. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's supposed to look like this or if it's supposed to look like this or this, but I think that it can't ever be like, here's what I'm making, go look at it. Like the thing that you said so often is, here, this is for you. Even you said it in this video, this is for you. And I didn't realize it was a pun at first. And I just took it as emotional, like this, I made this for you as an offering, not as you should go look at this. And that kind of changed the way that I have been thinking about my own work. And it lines up with this thing that Duke Ellington said a long time ago.
Nice.
Yeah. I went to grad school for interactive electronics. So I was making things like performer shoes, which are shoes that increase the speed of music the higher your foot's off the ground. I was making things like a solar bikini that charges your iPod shuffle while you're at the beach. I was making things like a Polaroid camera attached to a bicycle helmet that uses your eyes as a switch with spirit gum and some conductive thread. That's what this looks like here. All right. So one eye doesn't do it. The other eye, it's a no-go. But both eyes at the same time, And as you can probably tell, every picture from that would be a terrible picture with your eyes closed. But I was really obsessed with putting objects on the body. And then as I looked through these pictures, I noticed that there's a person in the background of every single one of these pictures. So the device, I mean, looking back at this now, I'm like, oh, the devices I was making weren't just to be cool devices. They were actually to bring people together. So I kept in that lineage of trying to bring people together with some other projects. There's a web-based project called Acting Stranger, which you can still do, in which I write very, very short scenes. No exposition, no inciting incident, no denouement at the end. You go to this website, you can read the scenes. Here's a scene that has to take place at the American Museum of Natural History between two people, just A and B. A stands there, B says, "I don't love you anymore." They continue to hold hands. A walks off. And so the crux of this is, or the conceit of it is that you sign up anonymously. We have to be strangers. We pick a date, a location, and a time using this form. And when you get to the cameras rolling, we don't introduce ourselves. We don't say hello. There's no direction. There's no second takes. We interact just as the characters in the scene. When it's over, there's no second takes, there's no thank yous, no goodbyes. We exit, we never see each other again. The video is uploaded to a website for other people to see. And in this way, you only ever experience this person in this little agreed moment of intimacy, which is what I thought I was doing. Here's one example of that, which is we invited some other writers from when we did the project in Seattle. So this is a writer by the name of Fox Whitney who wrote this one.
Do you really have to leave?
Yeah.
I hope it's nice there.
It is. I never loved you.
And that's it. They never see each other again. They walk their separate ways, and they have no idea who each other's personalities or identities are, other than that little brief moment. And we don't have time right now, but I think this project fails in a number of ways that is really exciting, because it doesn't actually promote intimacy between strangers, but it does. But the thing that it does beforehand, from the moment you sign up to the moment after you do it, like the feeling that you feel as the person who's doing it, that moment of magic where you turn in the street corner and like all the camera equipment's gone and you're like, this was made just for me. We set up this whole thing just for one person at a time. And that I realize is the magic of that project. I also make a lot of theater-based things. There's a project called After, in which the narrative is about a mountaineer dying on the side of a mountain. But what I want to highlight here is this idea of this technical precision that I go for in the theater, because it's a live space. We know what jump cuts are in film, but when you put them in theater, it becomes a different thing. And so what we're about to see is these aren't edited. These blackouts are not edited.
I wish that you would just listen instead of waiting for your turn to talk. No, 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 no!
It was a plane.
Doctor says you have 24 hours to live. And that's the good news?
I'm still here. I'm still totally not sure.
And just as this is the thing I was talking about. I'm working on this project right now, which used to be called The Stars, but is now actually called Now is When We Are. We are now. We've never been now before. And this has a little bit of documentary practice in it, I think, is each one of these stars, which is individually controlled, this is just the demo that you're seeing right now, but you can go through here and with hyper precise locational sound. Each one of these stars has a story, a memory, or a sound from a person who's been through this experience before, or from the community in which the installation sits. And so you can go around and explore this sea of voices, this constellation of voices, by getting close to a star, and you hear a story that's recorded from the local community about the grief that they're experiencing in their own lives, as a way to hold collective grief, and as a way to sort of leave traces behind of what would you want to leave behind if you could leave something for someone who will be here after you are here. And that's me. Humans telling stories about ourselves to each other in order to get better at being human, I think is what we're all trying to do, I hope. That's me.
It's Andrew. So great.
Thanks.
Great presentation.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, once again, thank you so much to Sarah and the folks here for having us, because it really is such a, it's such an amazing gift to be able to reflect on our own practice, both independently and together. So what we're going to talk about next is the projects that we've done together prior to current, I think, right? Yeah. Okay, so this is a project called the Institute of Memory. This is by Lars Jan, who's a frequent collaborator of Andrew and mine. Also a based on a true story project. This piece is about Lars's father, about memories of Lars's father that he had, and also about information that we gathered about Lars's father that he didn't have, that we got from a variety of Freedom of Information Act requests and things like that. This photograph here is of me on the right and Ryan Masson, another actor who was involved in the project. And Andrew came in to build this light object that you saw behind Ryan and I, which both hangs from the ceiling and moves during the show. So do you want to talk about how you got involved in that?
Yeah. Yeah, so Lars had this idea that he wanted this typewriter to control this giant light sculpture. I didn't really know anything about the show other than that, and he said, "Can you do this?" And I said, "I don't know how, but that's the nature of our collaborations, is to sort of figure out how to do it." So I came in and sort of built this typewriter that could control this lighting sculpture with the team, and that's where I first met Annie, and we sort of, it was like, "Hey, I built this instrument. I'm going to try to teach you how to play this instrument." I have no idea how to play this instrument.
I was
but
really bad at it.
No, you were great. It was like we learned what the instrument was good at together, basically.
I was typing on the typewriter, and these lights were going on and off.
Yeah.
That's Andrew typing on the typewriter. This is myself and Sunny Valicenti. This is before we met Andrew on the project. This is how the project began with Sunny and I, then changed to Andrew, and I mean Ryan and I, and then became Andrew and Sunny, who eventually ended up performing. So this is actually a really good just example of how we work together, and also how we work with other artists, which is that we don't always know what our role is going to be when we enter into a project. On this project, I was a sort of generative collaborator and performer, and Andrew came in as also a generative collaborator and kind of inventor of creative technical objects, ended up performing as well. So we're always just like looking to be in service of what the artwork wants to be, and how we can use all of our different capacities as artists to let that live the most fully. Yeah,
it's an exciting place to be operating from, especially with other folks like that, where it's like we can work together on a project and we really don't know, like, what am I going to do on this? The sound?
Totally.
Perform?
Yeah.
Like, it's really, it's exciting.
And Current was like that as well. It was in this first Zoom call that we're going to see in a little bit between us about the project, we talk about, like, I think I've said, I think it's a sound design job. I also think it's concept development and narration and maybe performance, and being able to be kind of open like that is really helpful to us. So this is the next project that we worked on together. As you saw in Andrew's presentation about his own work, you'll understand why I thought of Andrew for this project. So I knew that for this house, I wanted the lights to respond to both what people were hearing in the headphones and also where they were moving in the rooms. I also knew that I wanted it to have a feeling of magic. So we're always looking for these moments of like, how did that happen? Did I do that? How did they do that in these projects? And I knew that Andrew could do that and also do that in a really innovative way and using mainly practical lights, which is what I wanted the aesthetic to look like in here.
And so this is the house that got built in the Oculus subway sort of passage. There's just some shots of the actual house being constructed, an actual house. I want to stress that. And it looks incredible. It doesn't even look real.
This is the real object. This is not a render, even though that's what it looks like. On the outside, conceptually, I really wanted it to look like something that came out of a 3D printer or in a virtual reality world. And then on the inside, the rooms were much more realistic. And as audience walked through, they heard these interviews of the survivors that I mentioned before.
This is me just, you know, when we first chatted and you sort of said, here's the story of what I want to happen. We were chatting before this talk and you said we had one design meeting, only once.
Yeah.
And because it was such a short turnaround, and like I was saying, you told me what the story was, and I saw it in my head, and that's where we went, and luckily those things really lined up.
Here we are working, listening. So this project used kind of some of the research for this project led into the technologies that we use for current as well. But this project was run on silent disco technology, which is radio frequency. Because we couldn't use, and Jackie Zoe, who worked on current, also was involved in this project as a sound designer, and Jackie and I tested Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, all kinds of transmission technologies within the Oculus, and they were all had too much interference. And also just talking about what we've been saying about always thinking about the physical experience of the audience member. For this project in particular, I wanted to make sure that people just had one piece of hardware from us, so just headphones, no receiver, nothing that they had to worry about or control. And so silent disco was the answer to that, and also the way that we operated the lights and the sound under surveillance, which is coming up in these different slides. So this is a stage manager operating lighting and sound design for people walking through in headphones. We can keep going. This is a little bit what the interior of the rooms looked like. So they were kind of domestic rooms that became more and more abstracted and surreal to the point where they sort of became a museum and then a police evidence room. We can see a little bit of video of this, just aware that we have to get to our actual project.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, I have to get out of this house.
Maybe I'll skip to.
Recorded our voices, so when people go through, they'll have the headset on and they can hear.
In this United States, the most dangerous place.
Trying to fit myself into this mold that I
It is like
believed and thought I
amazing
was
to think
supposed
that in the
be
70s that
in.
you couldn't get your own credit card without a man's signature.
Each room in this house is meant to tell a survivor's story.
They recorded our voices, so when people go
The car door, and he pulled out my chair.
Ripped all of my clothes off.
Yeah,
We have these closet doors with the slats on them. And
She's like, he'll never think to look there. It'll be fine.
Okay, imagine you're in a room this big with someone who's screaming at you.
Shake it until it cries. I wanted to die.
Yeah. Great. So those are some examples. As you saw, the kind of environment changing as the person was walking through the house. I think that's great. And then the next thing we worked on together and are continuing to work on together is this project called Rest, which is about sensory deprivation and the nature of consciousness and how we construct reality out of sensory experience. And that is a concept for a performance installation, but in the pandemic, like with so many projects, there was an ask from MPAC where we had a residency scheduled to work on the performance as to whether it could be something that also might have an expression as a internet thing. And so I asked Andrew if he wanted to go to MPAC and make some experimental light movies.
And I obviously said yes, because that's how could you say no to that? And the brief of the project just being about sensory deprivation, perception, consciousness, different states of mind. And the clip that I showed of after was very much about that, about hallucinations and how all happenings are in the mind, and really exploring those concepts through a live medium. Even though we made the film is in order to try to get sort of more support for a live presentation.
Totally, and to see how much we could do with how much we could do with light and shadow in camera,
right?
And like how whether it's possible to engender organic emotions in audience members. First of all, this was a big question for us in the pandemic. Like, how, as live artists, do we continue to have access to our audience when we're not able to invite them to be in space with us? So how can we give the message that we are thinking about them and thinking about where they are and how they feel, and as we're making these offerings, and I think that's what we tried to do with this project, and also to see how much kind of specific emotion we could elicit with pretty abstract material of just light and shadow. Mm-hmm. So this is some footage of us working on that project.
Which also, pandemic times, we were in residency, and then we were sort of half in residency when we found out that we couldn't actually be in the building anymore. But we had shot enough of this film with them over the course of a week that when we were not allowed back in the building because of COVID protocol, that we did it remotely through we hooked up all their cameras to a Zoom call and sort of directed the rest of the shoot remotely, which was very interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really wanted to share with you guys, and we'll get into it as we get into the project now of Current, is all the ways that we've worked together. Sometimes we're working together remotely in the sense that we're not in the same place together at the same time. Sometimes we're working remotely in the sense that whatever it is that's being created is remote from us. And sometimes we're working together in person. And there's all different collaborative processes that support those. And then I guess just to say, what I really take away from this overview that we've just given of our own work and also our collaborative practice, and as it relates to sort of documentary, the field of documentary, I suppose, is I was just reflecting as I was listening to all of this that, what we're always looking for is, I think both of us as artists are really interested in reality. Mm-hmm. And experienced reality, human experience, and what we perceive as reality and how we live our lives. And so we're always drawing from either a physical location or a concept that holds our attention and filtering that experience of reality through our own interpretation, and then kind of re-expressing that interpretation through the piece, both in its content and its form. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Current and how we made it very fast.
The real project.
The real project. So this started with a commission from Arts Brookfield, which is the arts commissioning branch of Brookfield Properties, who own a lot of buildings in Lower Manhattan. So like I said before, the only subject of this project was the geographical location itself. So one of the first things we did was go to the location and just see what came up in our observations, both in terms of listening and in terms of looking. But first we had an initial meeting, which we're going to play you a little bit of now.
Do we want there to be stuff that happens live? I don't know. I want to keep it simple,
Yeah. I wonder about the magic of one thing that happens.
That's
that
what
you don't expect, that you don't expect, and that you could never, and that you will never know if it was real or not.
Yeah. And I do think even that is embodied in the is that here, is that there, is that like this thing about the using what's in the environment, but it's real, but it's out of time. No, it's not. That's not
I'm
my
just kidding. I'm sorry.
At all to be
I'm sorry.
I literally was I literally wanted to talk to you because I was I'm not going to be oh, if Jackie can't, then I was like, we could just be like up on the side, like making a sound walk. We won't tell anyone.
I mean, what a dream that. I'm serious. Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, and then I was like, well, first of all, I want to talk to Jackie just because that's,
I understand.
And then secondly, I don't know if you want to do that. Like,
I'm sorry.
I don't assume that you want to do that.
I'm sorry. This is part of our relationship, is this sort of working through all of the things.
I think we could make something really
detailed
because you can be there. You know,
that's the thing that like is super exciting to me. Is like I could ride my bike there every day,
right?
And like just like get an hour of field recordings every single day.
And this.
Like,
yeah, this is the idea. Like, so just to talk very briefly about like any little shred of an idea that I have.
Mm-hmm.
There's
write that down. Any shred.
Something for me that I think is really interesting, where you hear things that are from there that aren't there. Like I was thinking about it when I was in Vermont in that elf place, and the leaves were falling.
Yeah.
And it was like the sound was incredible, and I was like, oh, I would love to hear this in the spring when it's not happening or something, you know, like there's something about hearing something that's site specific but out of time.
And like architecturally, I don't know if you do this ever. This has happened so many times where I'm recording something and I'm not sure if I'm playing something back or recording it live and monitoring it. And that's like incredibly exciting to actually not know if it's live or recorded, because architecturally the space is being built in your brain.
So this, first of all, just to share a little bit of our process and what I was saying before about, you know, when we enter into a project and we don't know exactly what the roles are going to be or what the work is going to be, sometimes there are moments where we just like talking with as much clarity as possible about things that we don't know. So Jackie Zoe, who also ended up being involved in this project, there was just a question in this first phone call about like how those roles would be shared. I was concerned about like overburdening Andrew with too much work. I was also concerned about the geographical distance. Jackie's also based in LA, and I thought like maybe it's good for me to have someone who can be side by side with me, but also someone on location, and we sort of worked that out. But also just to give you an example of kind of what an early conversation looks like, and just also to reflect for ourselves how many ideas stayed in the project that actually came out of that first phone call. So we can get into now the first stages of the project. The next thing we did was a site visit, which was with Arts Brookfield, when they sort of gave us a sample route that was only 15 minutes long, which got much more complicated in the end. I think this is where I put them side by side.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is the final route for the walk, much more convoluted.
And the brief from them was these two properties, right?
Yeah, like, the brief from them was, we own two properties at different points in Lower Manhattan. Can you make a sound walk in between them? It can be about anything you want. It can work in any way you want. It can have live components, which is a little bit what we were talking about on that Zoom call as well. This is just a first email from Arts Brookfield, where we're kind of running through like what they're going to be responsible for, what I'm going to be responsible for, etc. Just to kind of share with you how much goes into it. This is a little video we can play a little bit without sound of our initial site visit. So Andrew came with me to the site visit, and we, you know, so much of the material for all of these projects, for me, the site visit is really the beginning of every project. Where is it going to be? What are the people going to experience? Even if that's like they're going to be at home, they're going to experience it on their phone. It's really important for me to be in the place where the audience member is going to be and imagine myself as them.
And part of why I like showing this is that, you know, they were like, you could do it here.
Totally.
You could do it
in
in
mall.
this mall.
Yeah.
You could be in this tiny room off to the side. Would that be helpful for you?
Yeah. It really could have been anything.
It's so different than what we ended up with in the end. And then, you know, they took us on the direct route between their two properties, which was just a straight shot up Broadway, which has some history to it. You know, thinking about this archaeology idea from the beginning of like what was here beforehand that we can't see anymore. But going up Broadway, you miss all the little gems, and so you know, pretty early on after this site visit, we started talking about that.
And I think a lot of the time in the work, there's a artistic moment of like, what are we working with? So here we're working with a geographical location. What's the most straightforward way of looking at this material? And then what's a way of looking at this material? Like, how can we complicate this and make it more, pull it apart and see what sort of abstraction it has to offer? How deep does it go? You know?
And so they were really keen on these buildings, and you know, we were looking at the buildings, and then across the street is actually Zuccotti Park, one like, and we were like, oh, can we actually go over there and use that? Like, what are the parameters?
Yeah, this is just what our schedule looked like at the beginning. So, you know, trying to stay, even like in that first Zoom call, you saw us kind of being like, oh, maybe it's going to be this, maybe it's going to be that. But in addition to that kind of broadness, we try to be as specific as possible about who's doing what, when, how long it's going to take, what the expectations are.
Even though we know that it could change tomorrow.
So this all happened in November. The next thing that I did and that I do on all my projects is just start pulling together a huge amount of research. Anything that feels like it touches the geographical location, whether that's like a theme or an actual architectural or archaeological object. So these are some of the books that we were looking at. There's also like a Zoom invitation on that slide between Danny Lyon and myself, the author of that book, which was actually a call that we did with Andrew as well. This is a book that documented the destruction of 60 acres of 19th century buildings in Lower Manhattan in 1967. And these are some photographs that I took. The one on the left is from Lower Manhattan. The one on the right is from Red Rock Canyon in Malibu, when I went back to California and was thinking about kind of looking around for things that looked like a map of Lower Manhattan, which started to come together as with an overlay of a human heart in the themes of the project. So also what happened in November was the beginning of the dramaturgy, which came from walking in the location. So I walked in the location and listened to different types of material. In the end, I ended up listening to a voice memo that I left for myself, which became a lot of what the project is made out of. And then Andrew and I started sending those back and forth in December, as we'll see in the next section.
And very early on, it became apparent that the part of the crux of the project was, in fact, that I lived here and you didn't.
Yeah.
Which that kind of made it what it is, I think.
Yeah. So this is just more of our research, again, just looking at like different ways of seeing the location and seeing what the location can mean. So this is these are some early notes and a map, watercolor map this is what our Google Drive looked like. These are some research emails where I was looking to talk to people who researched Lower Manhattan. So Nate Kessinger researches waterways in Lower Manhattan. I also talked to Bill T. Jones. This is a photograph of Bill T. Jones making a dance performance on what would become the Battery Park City.
But this is a beach. This is a real beach.
This is the Battery Park City landfill beach.
I didn't know this existed until we did this project.
Yeah. And these are some extracts from pieces about coastal resilience and also psychological resilience. So again, like we're looking at material from the environment. What does the environment engender? In Lower Manhattan, what's the first type of thing that I notice? I notice all the construction, all the demolition, all the reflections, like all these touch points came from the first site visit, and then we just sort of pulled them apart to see how much they could mean. You know, what can we take from real life, and then how much can it mean to us, and then how can we share that with the audience? Yeah. What happened in December?
It's cold in December in New York City, especially down in the financial district.
We learned a lot about working on location.
On location, yeah. And one of the things is the financial district as a site is, I don't live there, you don't live there, I can't even imagine living there. I don't know if any of you have lived there, but it's to me, I have such a strange association with it because I had no reason to go there. I'm primarily involved in performance. There's a few dance things down there, but it seems to like evolve and it never really sheds its financialness, but there's like some grittiness down there, and it seems to evolve and go through phases, but I'm never sure what it is. So it became very important for us to have somebody who goes there all of the time, just to see it. And so we started in December. I would go there and sort of report back my findings to Annie. This is the way we worked, is I would just take a bunch of pictures and videos and things that I noticed, like, hey, these trees on the left here, you know, they're lit up with Christmas lights during this time. I don't know if that's going to be the same when we get here, because we knew that the project was going to be in the summer. Here's a car. I don't know if cars can actually be here. Here's like a literal archaeological dig in Lower Manhattan that if you go off of the path that we already said that we were going to go on, you actually walk past this. And would it be cool to like look into this little archaeology? So just going there and trying to find things that
okay, last one,
that just caught my eye.
Yeah, like what is immediately apparent and then what isn't immediately apparent.
Right.
I think we're like
Right.
different generative exercises. So, you know,
To go there enough to have. I still go there with the tourist's eyes because I don't have any reason to be there. And so for me, with the tourist's eyes, you see the surface of everything, and like maybe you notice some little gems here and there, but when you really go there a lot and like, okay, actually there's all of these clocks down here. Like if you look across the river, there's a clock that you can see, the Colgate clock in New Jersey. If you look at this, there's, you know, and this kept happening over and over, like with these clocks, things that are hidden below. Things are hidden in foyers.
Just like looking for things that could mean something or be, you know, thinking both about the story and about the experience of the audience member. Also, I think just from going, like, how do you get to know a place? And this sort of relates to documentary as well. Like, how do you get to know the subject and the material of where you are? And especially with geographical locations, I think we started to understand a little bit how we internalize geography. You know, like what I was almost going to say just then when you were like, and then I went there every single day. It's like, and you were like, I don't know the area at all. And now you know it like the back of your hand, which is like an expression that we use to transpose maps onto the physical body. And also we, what I started to notice when I was talking to people about what it used to be like in Lower Manhattan is a lot of the time, especially in places that we are familiar with over a long period of time, we talk about them, we navigate them based on what used to be there. So like in your hometown, you might be like, oh, the way you get to my house is you make a left where the Dairy Queen used to be. And like, why would you say that? You know, you just say the name of the street. But when you have this shorthand with other people who have an interior map of the location, you kind of talk about it in this way that's out of time that was instructive for us.
Yeah. And for me, it also became, there was a book called Manhattan.
Yes.
I think, which for me just, it talked about the biodiversity before colonization and before industrialization, and just how there was more biodiversity in New York Harbor than like Yosemite.
Whales, and, yeah.
Which is
like
wild to think about.
Rainforest.
It's the first talk that we ever had when we didn't know what the project was going to be. I remember we were sitting in a coffee shop and we sort of noticed, we said, you cannot look in any direction and see this horizon.
Yeah.
You cannot look in any direction. Like out of this window, you can't see the sky. You can only see buildings. Everything here was made by a person. These trees were put here by a person. Every single thing. And for me, thinking about that there, you can see horizon if you get out far enough, and thinking about the light and thinking about, is there a magic moment where like, okay, on December 21st, the light lines up like this, and you can, you know, and it's like perfectly aligned with this statue of an eagle. I know that doesn't help us in May, but like, are there other things that we'll be able to tell? Like, can they see the Statue of Liberty through like the ball of the sun?
And it really goes back to like this kind of, we can go through, I think, to the next, because we are running out of time. Oh yeah, tech, mics. It really goes back to sort of what we were presenting about our own work independently, and this idea of like, these are offerings, we're creating these as offerings for future versions of ourselves that we imagine to be other people who are audience members, right? So like, we're walking around being like, what would be cool to show them? Could they see this? Can they see these shadows? Is it cool to look into the, you know, like with the architectural dig, we eventually decided like, it's so complex to tell them how to get to it, and then it doesn't really pay itself off when they look.
Right.
So like some things are like, could this be cool? And then with exploration, like, no, they can't because of the form.
I mean, and we talk about things that are being cool. One of the first things that I think happened, you know, we talked about the buildings that day, and then you went off and recorded some voice memos, and we quickly sort of realized, and we did these audio tests with dark field radio, actually. So so it's kind of convoluted, but these things combined. Hearing someone describe something in a location that you are now, that they are no longer there. you are hearing them describe something that they used to see, and whether that's there or not, it became a big thing. And with the Dark Field Radio app, the fact that you weren't listening, you had no control over your device, that you weren't pressing play, that it was cinematic. It became cinematic because it happened only at the time that it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, what we really discovered was like a lot of the things that we were thinking about in the creation of this project in terms of format is like, how can it feel live? How can it have these essential qualities of liveness, which are togetherness, synchronicity, magic, and something else that I can't think of right now. But like, if basically we learned, like, if you can control the space and the time, then you have theatricality, basically.
Yeah. And if you can get people to question their perceptions and their own realities, and going back to that clip of the first Zoom call that we showed you, where we talk about recording and like having a microphone and listening to it on headphones and walking around, and then playing that back, and so hearing the same architectural space in the space that you're in, but from a while ago, we quickly learned that like that is a moment of magic where if you walk under a scaffolding and the audio that you're listening to goes under a scaffolding, that becomes sort of magical, because if you hear someone out of your left ear walk by you in that architectural space, it's not that we're designing the sound to put someone there, it's that actually happened, and your brain doesn't know the difference between. We went down and just to get ready for this talk, we went down there and there's a helicopter in the audio track. And
Yeah,
20 minutes, I was like, where is that
every time.
helicopter?
It's in the past.
It's in the past, exactly. In order to do that, we researched a bunch of, my internet connection's unstable.
No.
Sorry, y'all.
The last thing we need. Talk about the microphones and then
Very
we'll talk
briefly,
more about
yeah.
the tech testing.
Yes.
We have to get to the actual thing to play them the audio.
So we were looking at different forms of microphones. We settled on this very cheap ambisonic mic from Zoom because there's such a high noise floor in Lower Manhattan. We didn't need pristine audio. We weren't recording in a studio. All this recording was on site.
Also because the eventual experience was in headphones.
Right, exactly.
So we're always thinking about what the actual experience is going to be.
And once we had the actual route mapped out, I had this idea where, okay, I'll just go and I'll record 5 minutes of audio at every single location that is 50 feet away from the next location. And so we can crossfade that. One of the early ideas was that we could be geolocative, and so if someone was halfway through the walk and they decided to go back, the audio would just follow them back and crossfade back into the other sections.
When we were testing on this app called Echoes, which is a GPS activated app that we quickly realized just wasn't going to work for us in many ways because GPS doesn't work in Lower Manhattan, which actually found its way into the narrative of the project as well and became about navigation and knowing where we are or not.
Mm-hmm. So these are just shots in the various architectural locations. Broad Street in Exchange Alley sounds a lot different than underneath this scaffolding, for instance. And so much documentation of where these microphones were and how they were placed, and they're binaural, so you can rotate the scene in post. And so it was like, okay, which way might they be facing? And this, I like this because this is one of the only locations where you could hear the slight rustling of trees, other than the battery.
Okay, so then this is a section about January and February when we were putting more research together. I think you can go through this really fast because this is where we have 10 million research slides. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So this is how we put our research boards together for Arts Brookfield. This is some research about the Situationists and their philosophy and how it relates to the beach that's there. These are some coastal projections of flooding in Lower Manhattan next to the waterline from Hurricane Sandy and the original coastline from the 1600s, which, as you can see, are kind of all, they pretty much match up, which also became a big piece of narrative in our project. But this is just to show you kind of like how we put together this really broad constellation of research in a way that could be comprehensible to the commissioner and also to our other collaborators when we brought in, when Jackie Zoe came on to do the sound design elements that were not where she wasn't recording anything on location, but she was using the material that Andrew made to make some design choices about. For example, one big one is like things that you hear that are from a different part of the walk, but you hear them For example, you hear the water again at the end when you're in Zuccotti Park and you can't see any water or almost any sky at all. It was just great to have something like this to show her where she could sort of see visually our ideas. And same with Open-Ended Group, who ended up building our platform after we discovered by using the Wiretapper app from Darkfield Radio, as Andrew mentioned, which uses network time protocol, and we realized the magic of having something happen at a specific time of day. So in the end, we chose a web-based platform that had a GPS-activated start point, and then the rest of it was timed out by time of day, and it happened 7 times a day, so that it felt like you had agency and you could do it any time, but also it was like a show and it started at a specific time and you were on a ride. Because what we discovered testing on the Wiretapper app was having something start at a specific time of day really opens this aperture of the feeling of anything could be part of this.
Yeah.
Your imagination is just willing to like see a window open and have it sync with something in the sound. That's what gives that cinematic quality of like every single thing I'm seeing could be part of this. I don't know the budget of this thing. Like maybe this whole entire thing was made for me. And it is time that offers your imagination that possibility. And if you press play, it's just not there.
Yeah, and so it became really important for us to, I mean, just the amount of detail work that we were trying to get, because it was like, no, you have to feel like you're if you're under that scaffolding, you have to feel like you're under that scaffolding. And if you're 30 seconds off, it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah,
you know? And
so we have a lot of elements in the track to make sure that to have as much possibility as possible as keeping up with the audience. And we also, this is a listing of all the sunset times for the entirety of our run. So it ran from from June to October, and the sunset shifted, and we had to shift the times that the walk was programmed so that people would always be catching those magical hours. Because another thing that we're looking for in the geography of the place is what inherent theatricality it offers. And in Lower Manhattan, that's really the light at the end of the day.
Yeah, the light changing. May and June was also sort of crunch time for, okay, we have all these ideas.
Yeah.
Whoa, wow, we gotta go. We gotta really get them into a very playable, very robust thing. And so we were doing a lot of big decision making, a lot of pickups with audio, editing them together. I'm just gonna skip this one.
My name's Annie.
And with Jackie and 1000 Birds, editing things together, and really, this became an incredible feat of learning about. There are all these different tracks. There's the footstep track that we want people to feel like they're walking with the footsteps. There's the ambio track where it's like, okay, as you go under the scaffolding, you feel like you're going under the scaffolding. There's the narrative track where we're telling you things about the themes of the project, where we're asking you to think about certain things. And then there's the, hey, you got to turn left here track.
Yeah.
And if one of those things goes, oh, let's move that 15 seconds a little bit that way, everything changes.
You can't move a direction. You cannot move a direction. We really thought we had creative freedom to be like, just tell them to turn left a little bit later. Like, no, they missed the turn. Yeah. It's game over. So something we wanted to really show you in this section before we get to just playing you a little bit of the audio itself and then answer your questions is the complexity of the editing that goes into something that, again, feels like it is, when you hear it in real life, it feels like it's all one take. But actually the directions are on one track, the footsteps are on one track, all these things that Andrew mentioned. And also, just lastly to say, we tested, as a way of making sure that that was working, we tested those tracks independently on walkers who had never done the route before. So some things that were really important in our experimentation were testing just the footstep pace and just the directions on walkers who had never done it before, and then asking them questions about where they got lost, where they got confused. We learned a huge amount. Our first test walker was actually ahead of the directions a lot of the time, so we had to turn around.
That's the worst.
So that was when we decided, when we realized that the directions need to be preempted and then they need to be repeated. Right. Which we just didn't. We were like bad GPS at the beginning, where we would be like, turn left right here, and the person would be in the wrong place.
A real respect for GPS and you know, okay, when should you tell someone to get off the exit? When should you tell somebody that they're going to turn left? How much detail do you, like a soft left here? Like, how do you describe something? And just for clarity's sake here, this is a live set of an edit, but the bulk of this work was done by Jackie and OTB, and not me in this not clean live set. But just to give you a sense of the things that we're talking about, you know, there's this track up here is just is narration combined with, so the purple is their narration and the blue is the actual directions, and so it's like, okay, we have to tell them to go where, when. And then there's an ambient track that's a footsteps track, so I can play some of this.
Pearl Street's a one-way to the right, and we're going to follow it that one way back toward Broad Street, and then we're going to make a left when we get to the...
So, for instance, here is just footsteps. Here's just the ambio. And then on top of that, we add the directions and the narration.
And somehow I just learned that a slip is like a parking spot for a boat. I mean, I didn't know that. And Pearl Street's a one-way to the right, and we're going to follow it that one way back toward Broad Street.
So when we play
and then we're going to make a left when we get to the Francis Tavern at the end of the block. Here we go.
This is a little demo of how we sort of put things together. And one thing I want to say about that is everything we recorded, we tried recording off-site. We tried recording in a wonderful place that we had access to, a hotel conference room that we made most of the project in.
Thank you, Mint House.
Thank you, Mint House. But eventually we realized that, it doesn't sound like we're walking. Like, it needs to sound like we're out of breath. If we're really walking next to them, we want them to feel like we're walking next to them. We can't be whispering in their ear. And so we ended up walking around Lower Manhattan with a microphone and listening to the footsteps, listening to other versions of the walk, and then saying our lines, recording our lines as we're walking through, and just the sheer complexity of all of that.
And there was a lot of experimentation that went into that. Initially, very early on, we thought, we're going to have to record the narration on location. And then, of course, I talked to a location sound recordist. He was like, don't do that. Do it in studio. You'll have noise on noise. And so we tried all these different things. But it's just an example of, like, first of all, how much experimentation it takes. And second of all, how the sort of unbeautiful way is often the most meaningful way for the final product. So you can see a little bit, I think, in the next slides about how complicated things got for Jackie.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. We have to answer questions.
Yeah. So this is what is this?
This is Pro Tools.
This is Pro Tools.
So this is just to give you an example. Can you go up to actually where Jackie says what this is? So she's kind of explaining just the thing that stands out to me the most about what Jackie sent over, which thank you so much, Jackie, is how much editing goes into something that comes together as if it was just recorded in one single hour-long shot. So this is just to give you some look at what Jackie's Pro Tools, how the complexity of what Jackie's Pro Tools sessions looked like. Whereas, and with this, a lot of the time, first of all, she wasn't in New York. She was kind of designing based on video and on material that we were sending. We were sending her material from a lot of different sources. And then we were also saying stuff to her like, can you move that direction 1 second?
1 second.
Back or forward or whatever. Cool. Should we just like slam through the rest of this stuff and then play them a little bit of sound? Oh, so this is the run.
Then we opened.
And we did the ending. So it's kind of as we were talking about on that first Zoom call. So for the first 2 weeks of this project, the beginning of the piece is messages that are left at different times by Andrew and I. Then there are sections where Andrew is the only voice that's accompanying you, and then I'm the only voice that's accompanying you. And then at the end of the piece, there's a live phone call between Andrew and I where we meet each other on opposite sides of Zuccotti Park. And during the first 2 weeks of the Tribeca Festival, we did that phone call live. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to make something where we could just insert ourselves into the project. In the way that Andrew was talking about in that first Zoom call, in a way that would be barely noticeable. If you catch it, you don't even actually know if it's part of it. So you just see two people on the phone looking for each other, which is something that happens in Zuccotti Park all the time and actually was created. You're
hearing that audio live.
Yeah, and so if you see that it's us and you see that we're in sync, then you see it. And if you don't, you don't. But we wanted to make something that would almost blend completely into the background. And so Open-Ended Group built us this platform where we could join we could see where people are on the walk, and then we could join their audio and interrupt them live. This is all this stuff. Should we just play them a little bit of it?
Yeah. Oh, people liked it. It was nice.
People liked it. It was nice. We won awards. Here we are winning awards. These are some of our producers. That's Mara Isaacs from Octopus Theatricals, who found us our way to Open-Ended Group, who built the platform and just supported us logistically through the whole project. And we'll play you a tiny bit of the actual thing, and then we'll answer your questions.
Where do you want to go to?
Gosh, I don't know. Where do you want to go to?
I think we'll go
Stone Street?
No, we'll try Stone Street. Sure.
I don't know.
Let's see where we can go to.
Stone Street.
Or maybe coming out of Wall Street.
Here.
Walking through the city with a microphone is like walking around with a stethoscope. You can hear the insides of things you can't hear just with your ears alone. It's kind of intimate in that way. There is a whole other city in there. A stethoscope can hear your heartbeat, through all these layers of muscle and solid bone. Before it was invented, they guess what was going on over there. And some of these emit high-pitched sounds that we can't explain. Just electricity, maybe. Like, what if you could hear all the heartbeats of all these people as they passed by us? Like the revolving doors at the World Trade Center.
Oh, 14 Wall Street.
We can keep walking.
I used to come here in the middle of the night also. They had an artist residency in an abandoned underground bank vault. No cell reception. It was really wonderful to be in a usually crowded place when no one else is around. It's one of my favorite things.
14 Wall Street, apparently modeled on an ancient Greek mausoleum, now an Equinox gym. I read that on one of these historic signs down here that I usually never even stop to read.
Let's take the next right on a Broad Street. Oh, there's a statue of George Washington. His hand hovering above where a Bible used to be. It also kind of just looks like he's like waiting for someone to take him for a walk.
Here's the statue of the little girl. Sometimes there are children playing around her as if she was a real person. I saw two kids posing for a photo with her yesterday as if she was their little friend. I hope you see some children here. Wish I could tell you what...
Or the water?
Yeah, let's see what the internet wants to do.
This is a documentation of a sound walk. It's a real creative challenge.
And in 1967, when they demolished so many buildings down here, all of a sudden all this water appeared, rushing to the surface after being buried for centuries. They had to have pumps running constantly.
Hi, this message is for Annie Saunders.
Here's back at Zuccotti.
Hey, where are you?
I'm at Zuccotti. Hey, 1 sec. This is Zuccotti Park.
Head into the park and find a place to sit down.
Just find a place to sit down. We're going to stay here for a few minutes.
What?
Sorry, I'm telling them where we are.
Okay, I'm here. I don't see you.
No, I'm here. Where are you?
Let's just find a seat for a couple of minutes. We're here because it's the end.
Oh, I think I lost you.
All right.
Nothing, I was just...
Thank you for doing that, Andrew. So hopefully that sheds a little light on who we are and what we're doing and what we made.
Thank you so much. It was a fascinating presentation, and just really how what it takes to make something feel live and also real. This is a documentary about a space, but just told in this incredible way. And then also your process is live, right? And it reminds me so much of what we study, which is co-creation, where the process, really the project comes from the relationship that you two have. And, there's no set roles or story or anything, and it just emerges from that. So it's really, really beautiful process and story. So thank you. Let's take some questions, comments from the panelists. If anyone wants to raise their hand. Okay, Halsey, you're on.
Hey, thank you so much. This was a fantastic description of everything you've been through, and it seems like 7 or 8 lifetimes, but it's just wonderful. So I have tons of questions, but I'll try to focus on one particular question. I do a lot of sort of geolocated sound work as well, and one of the things that I think about a lot is sort of the happenstance of working in the real world and the serendipity of that. And you guys have clearly created this incredible sort of, highly crafted, highly choreographed scenario, and then you place that into this completely uncontrolled environment. I mean, you don't know, like you said, the helicopter, you don't know what kind of siren is going to be going by, or, for the people who are listening, your future selves who are listening, which I love that notion. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of your relationship with serendipity, or sort of your sort of error bars of experience, if you will. Like at what point does it become too far off what you had hoped it to be in order to sort of still be what it is intended to be, if that makes sense? I'd just love to hear a little bit more about that thought process and your sort of comfort level with, on the one hand, highly choreographed, on the other hand, complete like potential for chaos. Where do they overlap?
So many things.
Yeah, for me, it's like the container or the scaffolding needs to be built with that in mind. Mm-hmm. And so, not that the project needs to be about serendipity, but it needs to, the architecture of the project needs to allow for it in like malleable ways, which sometimes takes longer than, oh, I have this idea, I want, like, let's do this. And it's like, well, let's do that. We're going to do it here. So the site is actually more important. So like, let's go check out the site and like see how the site informs the project, and then create a container that is porous enough so that controlled things can come in and out of it. Mm-hmm. And like one of the big things that we were really scared of is like, please don't get hit by a car.
Yeah.
Like real safe.
Be careful.
Real
and so we just
things.
told them, be careful.
And we told them, look around, because you might notice things that we don't notice. Mm-hmm. and that became part of the dramaturgy of the project as well. But I think that's what it was for me, is we had to make it part of the dramaturgy of the project. Or like, if we wanted it to be more controlled, we would have had to do a different project.
Yeah, it was just a creative process of like, we want to control as much as we can, because we want to curate the experience for these audience members as much as we can. We want them to feel like they've been invited to something that was thought through and created for them, and that it is a world in and of itself, right? So we need to control as much as we can. So like, when we can control the time of day, amazing. We can control, that means we can control like a lot of what you're seeing. We can control where you go. Great. So we think about all the things that we can control, and then we think about all the things that we can't control. So I'll give a couple of examples. There was a construction site that was a big marker for our directions. We were like, across the street, you're going to see black construction fencing, and you're going to go around it. And at some point we were like, when is that project going to be done? What is it going to look like when it's done? And amazingly, and this is also goes to the like sort of breadth of research that's required for planning for these kind of contingencies. We talked to the head of research at the Downtown Alliance, which is the business improvement district in Lower Manhattan. And he was like, that's a playground, and it's going to open in October. So then we changed our direction to be like, go to the construction fencing. And if you don't see construction fencing there, that means the playground's finally done. And like, so we just like added things in for some of the contingencies that we couldn't control. And then we also called it out, like, you might hit a diversion, there might be scaffolding where we say it is and not where it isn't. Just like keep Stay on your toes.
And to build it, I think we purposely built in rest points. So like, hey, if we get ahead or behind, don't worry about it. Like, just try to keep like, it might get off a little bit, but like, don't worry. We're gonna meet up. We're gonna meet up at a couple of points.
So they stop twice in the walk for a few minutes, which was also like a important creatively and dramaturgically, but also a fail-safe for contingencies. But I guess it does also just go back to like our practice is deeply rooted in live performance where anything can happen and you roll with it and you figure it out. And so even in these types of creations that are not as live theater, I suppose in some ways, we're coming at it from that perspective.
Given that we have so little time, I am going to go straight to the audience and take a question there. From Shanika Vilas. How would you describe who your audience is since you're interested in reality? How are you including disability differences and embodiment and experiencing your work?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. This accessibility on this project in particular was really challenging. Basically, the streets of Lower Manhattan have a lot of accessibility problems just in terms of like curb cutouts and cobblestones and stuff like that. So the possibility for someone to do it in a wheelchair is really challenging just based on what the city is offering. One thing that I offered to folks who maybe weren't in a position to walk, it's about 1.5 miles, the entire walk, and on the different types of terrains. I guess one thing I would say is we, on the website, when you access the walk, there was text that said this walk is 1.5 miles on different types of terrains. It involves gravel paths and cobblestones, etc. But also the way that the script was built, where it begins at Zuccotti Park and then it takes you on a walk and then it ends at Zuccotti Park, actually makes the possibility of just staying in the park and listening to the journey and ending back where you are an option. So those are some things that we think about, but certainly physical access to site-specific work is a constant consideration.
And the dramaturgy of the project even took that into consideration. Like, who is this for?
Yeah.
Like, and that's, we try to have some of those conversations with Arts Brookfield, also saying like, who is this? Like, who is your audience, Arts Brookfield? Like, like what is the outreach that's going on here?
Yeah. And one of the really exciting things about making work in public space or in non-traditional spaces is that people might happen upon it. So there was press and et cetera, but there's also physical signage, which is the really hoped for audience, people who are just passing by.
Yeah. Do we want to answer these two really quick?
We use Jamboard to make our research boards, and then you cannot still experience it, I'm afraid. It finished on October 8th. We're hoping that there will be another run of it this summer. We have been able to program some privately accessed shows for student groups, though. So if you have a group for educational purposes, we might be able to make that happen.
Can we talk about this?
Yes, yeah.
So just the last question, real quick, from Artemis. Zuccotti is also really linked to me with the Occupy movement, and they wouldn't let us talk about it. Arts Brookfield, the presenting organization, wouldn't let us talk about that or 9/11 specifically.
Yeah, those were the only two.
And I almost left the project at that point.
Really?
Yeah, I was like, this is not why? What's the purpose? And this is also always always a thing with institutions. It's just like, okay, well, we get to make this project because of you, institution, and now you have these rules about it. And so how do we be okay with ourselves at the end of the day, and like being censored about not being able to talk about something that is actually a very important part of this history?
Yeah, I was like, when they were like, that you can't talk about Occupy Wall Street and you can't talk about 9/11. I was like, well, I wasn't planning on talking about either of those things, but now, like, now that I can't.
I tried to.
But we had a piece of narrative at one point that I really liked. It didn't actually make the cut, but when we were in Zuccotti Park, we would say, this is Zuccotti Park. You may know it as the site of a major protest in 1773. This was the site of the first major public demonstration in the United States against British taxation without representation. 6 weeks before the Boston Tea Party or something like that, which was just like our way of sort of nodding at something. And then we talk about the World Trade Center as a building. We don't talk about its destruction. So
we talk about a lot of destruction of a lot of other buildings, and for us, it's true. We wanted to talk about it until it became dramaturgically apparent that we didn't need to talk about it, or like there's so many shows that you can make about this area. It was just like maybe that's another show. I mean, there's thousands of shows you can make, yeah, and it didn't make this one.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And thank you, panelists, and to you, the audience, for being here. We hope you join us next week when we have artists Felice Garte and Gayati Parameswaran. And thank you, of course, to our funders, John and Captain, the Parker Foundation and the Ford Foundation for making this possible. Thank you and goodbye.